So I'm Lauren with the Food Empowerment Project, and I just want to give a little bit of background on who I am and where I came from. Like Yumiko in the back, I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and grew up, you know, meat was everywhere. I'm a proud Chicana, so my family grew up with a lot of the foods that you can get at Gorditos, which is very exciting. But I got involved with social justice issues was my first issue. Primarily, when I was young, apartheid was still going on in South Africa. And so I was very involved in the boycotts that were taking place. And later I found out I actually was vegetarian when I was really young, but probably when I was in high school I became a vegan. And realized that being a vegan was something that no matter what age I was, I could do something about, that I could make these choices on my own. Are anybody here in college or in high school? If you don't have an animal rights group at your campus, I really, really encourage you to start one, and I'd be happy to help you. I found it to be incredibly rewarding to run groups at my high school and my university, and really just have people who were open to the message and who you could kind of regularly have a dialogue with, not like a one-time leafleting thing where you never see the people again, but you would regularly be able to have conversations with people about these issues. So I ran an organization called Viva USA where I conducted my own factory farm investigations and slaughterhouse investigations and ran corporate campaigns. But I have always been tied with my desire to do social justice issues and do human rights issues and work on environmental issues. And I spoke at the World Social Forum in Caracas, Venezuela a number of years ago, and I spoke about the tie-in between corporate animal factories and how they exploit the animals, they exploit workers, and they exploit the environment. And in my talk, I was lucky enough to have people from Cuba, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, just all around Latin America, including some people from the United States, come to my talk. And one of the things they were wondering is, who works on these issues? Who can we really talk to about these issues? And at the time, I had absolutely no idea who could really work on these issues. And when I was there, I don't know if any of you are familiar with what happened in Bolivia with them trying to privatize the water in Bolivia, and they fought it off. Just the native peoples fought off the privatization of the water by a corporation that has an office in San Francisco. And one of the main indigenous people who was working on that campaign was speaking in Caracas when I was there, and I started to realize that all the issues that I really cared about, whether it be animals, whether it be worker issues, environmental issues, these were all things that related to food. And I care about the blood diamond issues, I care about all these other issues, but I was trying to figure out a way that I could talk about an issue that everybody could do something about. You know, it's kind of like when you talk to people about fur, and they don't buy a fur anyway, so it's very easy for them to agree with you. You know, if not a lot of people are buying diamonds, it doesn't, you know, they can empathize with you, but they can't really do something about it. But with your food choices, it's something that everybody does every day. And so it was a way that I could kind of tie in all these issues and try and maybe help people make some change. So so then I started the Food Empowerment Project. And the Food Empowerment Project's mission kind of is a large one, but we go through and we try and tie all these issues together. So in creating our logo, we had a really difficult time because we're bringing in so many different issues. We didn't want to have an animal on our logo when we're called the Food Empowerment Project because we don't want people to think of animals as food. So it was a difficult logo, but we got it done took some time. But what we're trying to do really is tie in all these issues that we know a lot of people care about. People who are vegan, you get it, and I will go into animals killed for food a little bit because it is a main component of what Food Empowerment Project does. But the other thing, in advocating for a vegan diet, we are actually telling people to go and consume more fruits and more vegetables. But if the farm workers in those fields are treated with just as much disrespect and put through horrible circumstances, how can we in all good consciousness promote a vegan diet unless we also advocate for those workers? We talk a lot about vegans and we talk about how the fact that we have the most compassionate diet, I think we're on the right track, but I don't think we're already there yet until we start to look at some of these other social justice issues when it comes to food. Another component that we work on is environmental racism, and I'll go through all of these during my talk. Environmental racism when it comes to factory farming, when it comes to slaughterhouses. as well as just food justice issues. Food justice issues meaning the foods that you buy that may contribute to slavery or suffering of other beings, as well as the food justice issue in the United States, which is access to healthy foods in low-income communities and communities of color. So we're very lucky to have the support of Dolores Huerta. For those of you who don't know, Cesar Chavez was a vegan. He started the United Farm Workers, and Dolores Huerta co-founded it, and she also is a strict vegetarian. So a lot of people in the labor movement for agricultural produce tend to be vegetarians. And if people don't know the story about Cesar Chavez, when he was asked after he gave a talk once why he was a vegan, and he said there's more suffering in the egg and the dairy industry than there is in the meat industry. So I'd rather people come up and not tell me they're vegetarian, but that they don't eat eggs and milk. So, anyway, so this is my favorite duck right now. And so I always have to have him. His name's Quincy, and I'm horribly in love with this duck. He lives at Woodstock Farm Sanctuary in Woodstock, New York. But I kind of use him now to talk about, and again, I know most of you know about factory farming, so I'm going to do it pretty brief, but since it is a strong component of Food Empowerment Project, I always have to talk about them as well. A lot of you know Viva USA, our main investigation was on duck factory farms, and we investigated duck farms around the United States. And Pekin ducks like this one, a number of them used, as well as another duck called a Muscovy duck. And I did investigations around the country, and then we wrote all the grocery stores who were selling duck meat and asked them to stop selling duck meat. A couple, just based on our investigations, quit selling all duck meat. But a few locations, such as Trader Joe's, weren't so easy to let it go. So for 9 months, we had activists around the country protesting Trader Joe's. Do y'all even have Trader Joe's here? Okay, you do. At the time, not everybody had a Trader Joe's. So after 9 months, and to this day, Trader Joe's has stopped carrying all duck meat. They don't sell any at all. Whole Foods Market was our other big campaign target, which instead of stop carrying duck meat, they instead started revisiting all their regulations for how animals are raised and killed for food. But like Chad mentioned, one of the offshoots of that was John Mackey going vegan. So a lot of people in our website, Food Empowerment Project just launched our new website this week, and we have some photos, but the ducks are raised similar to chickens where they have the tips of their bills cut off. They're also denied access to water. So for a duck, they need water to immerse themselves in order to maintain body temperature and in order to not go blind, basically. And they're denied all of this in a factory farm. But they're raised in sheds similar to chickens who are raised for meat. And a lot of people think, oh, you only find duck at Chinese food restaurants or things like that. Duck's sold in every grocery store in this country. It's just in a frozen food area. So, but anyway, I really just used so I can show everybody Quincy because he makes everybody smile because he's so adorable. These are pigs also from Woodstock, and I did a number of pig investigations, primarily in North Carolina and Georgia, where it's probably the most painful investigations that I did, where lots of piglets in what they call a nursery. After the babies are taken away from their mom, they're put in what's called a nursery. And tons of dead piglets in these just beautiful little baby piglets who are dead. But again, as everybody knows, the mother pig is kept in a gestation crate while she's pregnant. And when she gives birth, she's moved to a farrowing crate, where her baby, when she gives birth to her babies, they're taken away at about 3 weeks of age. She's moved from one of these two crates for 4 years of her life until her piglet production goes down, then she's eventually killed. So, and then these are hens. Just to talk a little bit, I'm sure everybody's familiar with how hens are raised for eggs, kept in battery cages where they're stacked on top of each other. I did a rescue in Gilroy, California, where the farm was actually going out of business. And they allowed us to go in and rescue the hens. And as much as that seems like a fantastic, wonderful thing to do, it's impossible to take all of them. And the hardest thing about that for me were all the ones that we left behind. It was the fact that as I was taking hens out of, middle crates, the ones I could reach, I had to see all the other ones that I left behind, and all of them were looking at us, and there was no way we could take all the hens. But again, I know that it's important to save lives, and I'm glad we did it. But I think the reality of these rescues that a lot of us do, there's so much pain involved as well for all the ones that we leave behind. Dairy industry. I'm just going to show the pictures because everybody pretty much here knows about veganism. So I'm going to skip some of this and go on to the other stuff. Fishies. So like I said, a big component of the Food Empowerment Project as well is in promoting veganism. We want to make sure that the farm workers are treated well. In the state of California, 2 years ago, we had a young woman who was 17 years old who died in the fields. She was actually pregnant as well. And the reason why she died in the fields is because these fields go on for quite some time, and they put water in locations that it's almost impossible for them to walk to. So if you have a 10-minute break and you can go and you can walk to the water station, you don't have any time to walk back to where you're supposed to be working. So instead, they choose not to drink water. And so a lot of them, just last year, 7 died of heat stroke. So, you know, what we try to do is, because we're Food Empowerment Project's an all-volunteer organization. There's no paid staff. I have a full-time job that I work at as well. It's another nonprofit organization. So we're not to the point where we can work on these issues as much as we'd like to. At this point, what we do is we support the efforts of the United Farm Workers, and we put a lot of their emails out, as well as the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, FLOC. And we try to do what we can to support their efforts. But one of the things we encourage everybody to do is, obviously it's difficult, but to make sure you try and buy with the union label. And it's a little bit harder to find, but it's important to try and buy union. And eventually we'll have information on the produce you can buy that's union labeled. The other thing is, if you buy from farmers markets and stuff like that, obviously you can talk to the workers, you can talk to the people who own the facilities. So there's always that importance of dialogue with whoever. You know, a lot of times people are always like, where can I buy free-range eggs? And you're like, okay, we'll call the farm and see if you can go visit it. If they don't let you go visit it, there's a problem. Same thing with these places. I mean, we want to make sure, and keep in mind that everything I'm talking about today, I'm not going to act like I'm perfect on, because I'm not. I'm always striving to be better myself. But these are little things that we can do. Obviously, buying organic, if you think of organic and produce, it's kind of the same thing with the animals. Organic means they don't have the pesticides, but it doesn't mean anything for the working conditions of the people. So farm workers have, there's this little loophole in like the agricultural law that basically says, you know, if you're of a certain age, if you're underage to be working, but you work in the close proximity of your parents, that you can still work. And it's like this agricultural loophole back in the, you know, old farm days when the kids would go out and help their parents milk the cow, but the agricultural industry uses it to still, you know, allow child labor, basically. And child labor still goes on in slaughterhouses. It goes on in factory farms where children are put to work. There was huge fines against a slaughterhouse a couple years ago for it. But in terms of these areas, you have workers who do not get breaks, who do not get water, who have horrible, their living conditions are sleeping in the back of a flatbed truck. They are not getting paid. They're kind of like indentured servants. A lot of them are advertised from the United States to countries in Latin America to try and pull them up here. And once they get up here, it's kind of like, okay, well, you can live here and we'll pay for you to live here, but you owe us rent at the end of the day. So the workers earn just barely enough to make the money to pay the rent, and if anything happens where their rights are violated, a lot of these are undocumented workers. So they can't really speak out and defend themselves because they're afraid of being deported. I went to college with a number of children of farm workers where they would talk to me about how their parents didn't speak English, but they did, and how they as children were basically victimized by the owners of these farms because they would treat these young children like they were adults and scream at them and tell them how they should be working harder or they needed to produce more or they were going to be fired. So I'm really making everybody happy, and I know that. But it's just really important to be aware of it, and that's a lot of, we know with Food Empowerment Project, with speaking to the vegan community, we know you get the vegan stuff, but it's all this other stuff that we want to make sure people know about because it's important for all of our food choices, not to make a difference not just for the animals, but to other people, other victims, other beings who are exploited and oppressed as well. Another area that we'll be talking about is environmental racism. Is anybody here familiar with that term? Can anybody tell me if there's an example in Portland that goes on?
The North Portland neighborhoods have the worst air quality and soil quality in all of
And is it because of refineries or because of
creosote factories on the Willamette River, shipping?
So that's primarily when the organization I work for my paid job, we work on environmental racism. And a lot of what you hear about is the toxics issues. The fact that communities of color are primarily located in areas where there's oil refineries, where the truck depots are, really where the oil and, the air quality is really bad. And they don't really, not all, but a lot of these areas, they don't have a lot of power to speak out against it. What I've been trying to bring to the environmental justice movement is the reality that there's environmental racism when it comes to factory farming, when it comes to slaughterhouses. And the fact is that a majority of factory farms are located in communities of color and low-income communities. And one of the best examples is North Carolina, where you have people who can't even open their windows in the summertime because of the smells, people suffering from nausea, constant headaches, all sorts of physical ailments because the farms. And I can tell you from investigating pig farms, I would shower like 3 times after one investigation. I'd still smell like a pig farm. It was the worst smelling farm of all the farms I investigated. Dairy farms in California, one dairy cow produces 125 pounds of wet manure per cow per day. Some of these farms have about 28,000 cows on them. That's the happy cows that you see from California. So what we're trying to do is draw attention to the fact that this is an environmental justice issue. This is sheer racism that's taking place. It's another people who's being exploited for the sake of animal consumption. And we want to make sure that more people know about it, more people speak out against it, because again, just like with everything else, these corporations are using people who they don't think have power or have voice or who have a vote to stop it from happening, which is exactly what they do to the animals. So the food justice aspect of what we do, which I want everybody to bear with me on this part because I know a lot of people love chocolate. I know you love chocolate. This is like the worst part for vegans for me to go into. But it's kind of like, when you tell somebody about how animals are treated for food and they still eat meat and everything. It's kind of how I feel sometimes when vegans around me still eat chocolate that's raised in, be eating chocolate that comes from the slave trade, basically. What happened is I watched this BBC episode, and it was about chocolate slavery in Africa and the Ivory Coast. And they had a quote from a man on there, and they said to him, if you could talk to Westerners about eating chocolate, what would you say? And he said, tell them they're eating chocolate, they're eating my flesh, they're eating my pain, they're eating my suffering. And I thought to myself, if an animal could talk, that's exactly what an animal would be saying. And I thought there's no way I can ever eat chocolate that comes from slavery again. And at that time, the only chocolate I knew I could eat was fair trade, but I couldn't really find much of it. And later on, I realized that organic chocolate does not come from the Ivory Coast. So what I do now is I eat chocolate that's organic or fair trade only. I don't eat any other chocolate that could possibly come from this. And what they do in Africa is they advertise, they get people to come in to work in the fields. And again, they talk a lot about child labor. When you read about this, a lot of the focus is on child labor, but it's the adults too. But I think children invoke something for people, and so that's why they tend to focus on that aspect. But what they do is they lock them in at night. After they're done picking, they literally lock them in at night. And when they try to leave, they beat them or they kill them. And the interview that was done by the BBC was actually done by somebody who escaped. So for me, this really came to hit reality again. Like I've been vegan for over 22 years. I've been thinking this whole time that I've been doing everything I can to lessen the suffering in this world. And I know I have. I know by eating a vegan diet, I can wake up in the morning and know I'm not responsible for the death of an animal. However, after hearing this, I started to realize that I'm not doing enough. I mean, and I know no one can be perfect, but it's really hard when you know something. There's no going back again. I'm sure we all feel that way about veganism, but that's how I really felt about chocolate, is there's no going back when you know what these people are going through. Another campaign that vegans love me to talk about is Coke's vegan. But, we're not even talking about the health aspects. But Coca-Cola, and again, I boycotted Coca-Cola when I was like 13 because of apartheid in South Africa. And I hold a grudge for a really long time. But then I started to learn other things about what they were doing. I learned about the privatization of water in India. India is running out of fresh water that's free because corporations like Coca-Cola are buying it up. And they're having to buy water themselves because of Coca-Cola. And frankly, they're running out of water in some places. So that's the whole bottled water industry, to be quite frank. But I know specifically about the Coca-Cola India, as well as the fact that Coca-Cola has been killing union workers in Colombia. They're responsible for squashing any type of movement to organize. So, and again, I'm not saying that everybody, you need to do all these things immediately. It's just about being informed purchasers, As vegans, we already are very aware, probably all of us in here read ingredients. We try to be very in tune about what we're doing because of the impacts that it has. And I really hope that people start to embrace these other concepts of their food choices. With every choice that you make, again, I say it all the time, but every time you buy something, it's a vote for or against something, right? You vote your ideals, you vote what you believe in, or you don't. And when you buy things that you don't believe in, again, not perfectly, but as much as we can, you can make a difference. Our slogan is because your food choices can change the world. And I strongly believe that. As somebody who's run corporate campaigns, that's pretty much what I've done. We may not be able to hit corporations in the stock market, but it's their reputation that we can hit. And that's our strength because we've got morality on our side. We have justice on our side when we talk about all these issues. So they will listen to the fact that they look like they're immoral, they're unjust. As corporations, probably they inherently are, except for Food Fight. But, there's things, there's things that we can do to make them change. So a big part of what Food Empowerment Project's been working on, I'm sorry, I have to drink water, is access to healthy foods. And one of the main things that we got started was because when I was in Venezuela, I learned about this area. It was in between two highways in Caracas. And what they did is they cleaned out all the garbage. I guess it took like 14 truckloads to get all the garbage out between the crossway between two highways. And they cleared all that area out, and they built an urban garden there for the homeless people. And I thought, that is an amazing concept. How we could grow food for everybody. Again, as vegans, we know we can be just fine off of, fruits and vegetables that we can grow in gardens. And that was around the same time. Is anybody here familiar with the South Central Farmers in Los Angeles? It's called like the brown-black community kind of thing that they do. But basically, there was a huge urban garden in this area, industrial area of Los Angeles. And there had been growing food for about 260 poor families in that area. And unfortunately, a developer bought the area, and some racist things happened on both sides. So there's no right and wrong in some ways. But unfortunately, they ended up destroying this entire garden area that was feeding all these people. And I realized that's what we need to have more of. I'm just going to be speaking as a Chicana here, but for our people to be empowered by the fact that we can grow our own food and we can be responsible for ourselves. And that's kind of what the farm was trying to do, was empower people to be responsible for themselves. We don't need to rely on anybody else for our sustenance. We can rely on our communities. So that really resonated. All these things are like what helped me form the Food Empowerment Project. And so when I moved to San Jose, California, I started to notice in my neighborhood, which I had read a lot about, were what they call food deserts, where you have more liquor stores than you have grocery stores. And I lived in one of these communities where every block I had liquor store, and then to go to a grocery store, to go to Whole Foods, I had to drive to another town. There was no grocery store in my immediate area at all. So what we started to do, and I'm going to backtrack a little bit. We created a survey. So there's something called food deserts, or what I call food apartheid, which is basically that communities of color and low-income communities are basically separated from healthy foods. We have those liquor stores, we don't have grocery stores. So what we did with Food Empowerment Project, again with all volunteers, we surveyed over 220 locations in Santa Clara County, which includes Palo Alto, San Jose, Los Gatos, some very wealthy areas. And all the wealthy areas were spread throughout the county, and all the poor areas were located in San Jose. And what we did is we surveyed on fresh fruits. So this is all the fruits, and we categorize it by organic, non-organic. So let's say, see lemons here? So when we would go to the liquor stores, everybody had the lemons near the Tecate. You know, there was their lemons. So we try and say what was the quantity on that? So they had less than 5. You know that they're kind of selling it really for people and their beers. They're not really selling it for people to buy food. Then we would notate the prices, how big it was, and then any other comments. So we did this with fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, canned fruits, canned vegetables, frozen fruits, frozen vegetables, as well as, which sets us aside from every other group working on this issue, is that we're vegan. So we wanted to account for all the dairy alternatives they had and all the meat alternatives they had, as well as did they had information out on vegetarianism? Did they have information out on lactose intolerance? Was the store primarily liquor, or was it primarily fresh fruits? Was it primarily meat? On the end caps, what do they have? Chips and sodas, meat, cheese, you know, so we kept track of all that stuff. And what we found, the data, our report's coming out next month in April. On our findings, but what we found out was not too surprising, which was that in every higher income area, you had 3 times more proper grocery stores than you had in the lower income areas. Because what happens is, let me show you this sign again. Stores like this, so it's called a liquor store. Some of them are called markets, and really what they are is they're liquor stores. But they sell chips, and they may sell a can of sardines, and they may sell a gallon of milk, and somehow they're getting off as being considered in U.S. Census tract data as a grocery store, even though they're liquor stores. They are 100% liquor stores, and yet they are considered to be grocery stores. So that's something that we're going to work on in San Jose, because it's outrageous to me, and that's why they get away with being across the street from each other, because there's no problem having 2 grocery stores across the street from each other, but they're really liquor stores. So when we went in, so in the lower income areas, pretty much all the stuff we surveyed were liquor stores. And most of the fruit was rotting. You could tell that they were trying, though. They had it out there, but the potatoes were rotten. The canned foods were expired a lot of times. And what was worse for a lot of the produce, as well as the canned food, was that there were no prices on them. So that means whoever was going in there to buy the stuff was a victim to whoever was at the counter that day. So I'd be like, how much is this banana? Nah, 50 cents. So they could decide, depending on who it was, how much to charge people. So, you know, with this stuff, it's really hard because we're trying to follow the environmental justice principles. Environmental justice principles means that an outsider, pretty much if you're working in a community of color, you don't really want a person who's not a person of color to go into these communities and start telling them what to do. And that's what's been happening for a long time now, is that people would go into the communities of color and say, you need a farmer's market, or you need organic produce. And communities of color are like, I don't really know what that is, and who are you, and what are you telling me? And so we're trying to follow the principles where we're not going to go into these communities and tell them what they need, because one, all the studies I've read, farmers markets don't work in these areas. Farmers markets are quite expensive to put on, and they're not going to go well in these areas. So we're going to be doing surveys of the lower income communities and asking the community what it is that they want, because we don't know what that is. We want people to have urban gardens, but if somebody's working 2 jobs and they get home late at night, they're not going to have time to grow a garden. If they live in an apartment complex, they may not even have the ability to have land. And a lot of the people we're talking about, you know, I think there's a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to these issues, because the media will always portray people of color as not wanting to eat right. They're just not healthy. They like fried chicken. They like bad foods. And it's just, the fact of the matter is they don't have access to it. There's increased rates of diabetes and obesity in communities of color, not because these people don't know how to eat, how to cook for themselves. They don't have access to it. People have to take imagine a lot of people don't have cars. So in order to go to the grocery store, they have to take a bus, maybe 2 buses, maybe 2 hours just to get to the grocery store and figure out how to carry all their groceries back with them. It's just not convenient, especially for people who are working. Like my mom worked 2 jobs to raise me and my sisters by herself. There's no way she could have done a whole lot, you know? I mean, I like, when I speak to kids of color, I always say, I'm not a foodie. I'm not coming in here and saying, you know, you should all embrace kale because it's the greatest thing in the world. I love French fries. It's my comfort food. But if we want to be stronger, we want to be healthier, and we don't want to be killed off by the corporations like McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken, we need to start eating differently. And that's what we try and get to the point is a lot of these people is the same corporations that are killing and exploiting animals are the same ones exploiting communities of color. And we have to stop it. We have to, as a unified force. I mean, one of the things I always talk about is Martin Luther King Jr., if anybody knows a lot about him, he became most dangerous, not when he was talking about the rights of African Americans, not when he was just talking about the civil rights movement. He became most dangerous when he started talking about the poor people, the janitor's plight in Chicago, when he started speaking against Vietnam. Then he got dangerous. Why? Because he was pulling everybody in. He wasn't just talking to one audience. He was talking to everybody who believed that way. And that's what I would like, us as a movement to do, is start embracing these other issues and realize the strength that we're going to have when we're not living in our vegan bubble and talking about veganism, but when we talk about all these other issues of food justice, that we're going to bring so many more people in. And we're going to be able to talk to them about veganism because the whole point of it is stopping exploitation, stopping suffering, and stopping a lot of the stuff that's taking place. And I want to say capitalism, but hopefully that doesn't offend anybody. But that's really the goal of it, is that we've got to stop this from happening. And I think the wider that we talk about in widening our circle of compassion, once we widen it to really look at the other vulnerable beings on our planet, as much as, a lot of people in this country don't want to acknowledge that racism is alive and well in this country, and I think we're seeing it more and more with Obama being our president, we have to do something about this. So, and I know, so Chad didn't want me just to come up here telling everybody to buy $3 candy bars that are organic, so I'll have more things. But this is an outreach that I did at, it's called Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco. It's the poorest area of San Francisco. And they invited me to speak about food justice issues and food access issues because they are really living in the thick of it. They have no grocery stores at all. And I think their only grocery store is something called like Food Co., and they all admit it's just disgusting food that they wouldn't even buy anything from. So, but the cool thing was that they were absolutely fascinated by veganism. So they were like, can you bring something vegan that the kids can try? And I was like, sure. I was thinking I could bring them new Minots, I don't know, cookies. And I was like, because I didn't want to have to do any more because I have a full-time job and I run a local animal rights group. And I was like, I can't do any more. And then I was like, but what if I fed them veggie burgers? So we took the kids veggie burgers, and these kids had never even had or even heard of a veggie burger. And they were like so impressed with it. This one kid kept on going, these are really different. These are really different. Then he ate 3 of them. Like all he would say was it was different, but he ate 3 of them. And it was really sad at one point because I asked them, how many of you have family members or you personally have diabetes? And over half the room raised their hand. They're all African American, a few Chicanos. And it was just really, really, really sad. I mean, San Francisco, there's absolutely no excuse for that. And yet, that's what these kids were living with. They didn't really know much about factory farming. One of the kids knew about veal. She knew all about veal. She was like really good. She's like, yeah, they don't let it move around. And so she knew about it. But for everything else, they just didn't really know about it. We had them try Vegenaise, as you can tell. She's grabbing the Vegenaise. But it was also different for them. And I admit, I brought barbecue chips. Because I was like, look, these are vegan, although I knew they weren't healthy. But I couldn't help it because I wanted them to realize that vegan food could be good. Bought organic, and they were like, wow, organic tastes good. So it was just a totally different community to be going out into where these kids were very interested in it. And they're part of, they're the ones experiencing it. They're the ones really going through it. I mean, I'm a Chicana. I grew up with a single mom, who worked 2 jobs, including a fast food restaurant. But compared to a lot of these kids, I'm so privileged to the point where I've been able to do animal rights for over 20 years of my life. When these kids have been struggling with gang violence, they've been struggling with, living in contaminated areas. My favorite example of what a privileged movement we are in some ways is that for veal, and I've always done this every year, but for Mother's Day to go out and talk about veal. For Mother's Day, a lot of these groups who work on environmental justice issues, what they talk about is their kids who have been shot in gangs or shot on the streets. And it's just a totally different world that we're kind of separated from, but I'm hoping that by embracing some of these issues, it can bring us together. So I'm almost done with my talk. So this is one of our websites, Vegan Mexican Food. It's in English and in Spanish, so if anybody wants some good recipes. And then just our brand new website with the Food Empowerment Project. If y'all haven't seen it, it's not complete yet. Again, we're all volunteer. So, but we will have up Know the Issues on farm workers, chocolate slavery. We're going to talk about things like factory farm workers and slaughterhouse workers. But one of the things that I think unfortunately, some groups in the animal movement who start to talk about these issues is different than us is because we are a vegan organization. So even if the slaughterhouse workers are given $15, $16 an hour, at the end of the day, we would still have a problem with it because they're still killing animals. And although we empathize with the fact that they're victims just as much, we probably could never engage in a campaign on those issues because it's not sincere. We're an openly vegan group, and to act as if we're going to then give thumbs up to Tyson for giving their workers a little bit more is insincere. We want that for the workers, but we can't really go out and campaign on that. But for farm workers who pick produce, absolutely, by all means, we'll be with them at the state capitol every time they need us there to speak out against the fact that there's no regulations for these people. So in terms of things you can do, obviously everybody's probably vegan. If not, go vegan, but I won't go into that. Just being an informed consumer, and I know organic's expensive, and on our website we have like the top 10 things that we think you can do to try and eat more ethically. And it's at least if you can't buy organic all the time, just maybe try buy a couple items, a week, or maybe 1 week buy, organic sugar or buy organic rice, or just always try and be thinking that way. And again, although it doesn't protect all the workers, it does protect them at least from those horrible pesticides, which now we're calling agricultural chemicals. We've talked to a lot of farm workers who say pesticides to most people mean it's supposed to make something better. Like if you use pesticides on a plant, then the plant's going to grow. Whereas it's not really that way for the workers. It's always bad for the workers. So you'll see that we're going to be using the word agricultural chemicals to talk about pesticides because that's what it really is at the end of the day. They're chemicals that are being used. And these people are having, birth defects, massive spontaneous abortions. Cancer rates are out of this world for these workers. So if you can't do it all the time, at least try and do it sometimes. And just being very, very informed of the food that you buy. I mean, we already read labels, so let's just find out a little bit more about the companies that we're buying from. Really do your best to only buy chocolate that's fair trade or organic. We've got to put this form of slavery out. I mean, it's just inexcusable, and if we could all just go down there and make it stop, I wish we could. In terms of a lot of these issues dealing with access to healthy foods, I mean, it's really countering those stereotypes. When you hear people talk about these things, where they talk about those people or something like that, because these stories come out all the time about obesity rates for African Americans or diabetes rates for Chicanos. There isn't a whole lot of afterwards that really explains why it's happening. You just hear about the fact that we have higher rates of these things, but there's no real explanation as to why it's taking place. So I just ask all of you, when you hear about it or you read about it, you write off that letter to the editor and talk about this food access issue, this food deserts, this food apartheid that's taking place in the United States, and how we need to stop that from happening. And if you want to help out, I mean, obviously, we want as much help as we can at Food Empowerment Project. We really want to encourage people to work within their communities. We want people to take our survey and use our survey in your communities. We're waiting to, once the report comes out, to make sure that we did it right. Like, we've had people from New York asking for it, North Carolina asking for it. We don't want to give somebody a template that we found out that has problems. But we do want people to start looking at these things and making an issue out of it, because it's not okay. I mean, it's absolutely unjustified. It's just something that I really hope we can do something about, because so many people don't know that it's happening, and not until even people who live in these areas, not until they see it for themselves or hear like, oh yeah, I do have a lot of liquor stores, or yeah, when I go to this grocery store, there's all this sugary crap at the front, but when I go to this grocery store, same company, both Safeways, but in another neighborhood, there's more organic produce out front. They have their fruit out front. I know that these young women from San Jose State who helped do our survey, one of them, she lives in the community, and she said this is really depressing, because she asked to do one of the higher income areas. And she was so sad when she went to a higher income grocery store. She said, this looks nothing like my stores. She said, and what's worse is if I even wanted to be vegetarian, I really couldn't be. But we did find, on the plus side in all of it, is there were liquor stores in one area in San Jose that had soy milk. They had like 2 liquor stores that had soy milk, and I was like loving the people. Like, this is so great. And then a couple of the mercados that had chorizo. And it wasn't a chorizo that I've ever seen in a Whole Foods or a regular grocery store. It was a very Chicano chorizo that was a company that I'd never even heard of. And then there's some soy milks that they had too. So when you consider that a majority of our population, whether you be a Latino or African American, we're lactose intolerant. So I find it a food injustice as well that we don't have access to the dairy alternatives that we should. So that's going to be an easy push for our organization, because we are going to go back to these grocery stores. One of them, Ricardo's, and I said, you know, what if we wanted to serve vegan horchata, which is a Mexican drink, as well as chorizo? And the guy was like, anytime, come here and hand it out. So they want us to do that. They want to have the healthier food. They want people to try it. But a lot of this stuff is just so new. And as we all are, we're kind of old in our ways. We just eat whatever we eat. So, but it's catching on. I mean, I think that lactose intolerance is going to be our easiest way in on the dairy alternatives in these communities, and we're gonna work it for all we can, or we're gonna milk it for all that we can. But the other thing I was asked to mention was the Yay Camp, which is, I think y'all have heard of. I spoke at it last year in Santa Cruz, and it was interesting because a lot of the kids there were absolutely adorable, I have to tell y'all. They were very, very cute, eager to be activists. And I think I was really impressed with the workshop itself when I spoke at it, because I didn't expect the kids to be as aware of other issues as they were. And I don't know if they became aware because of the camp and the films that they were showing, or maybe it allowed them to show this side of themselves. But I know there's some information up here if anybody wants to sign up. And we got Food Empowerment Project and Let Live. And I want to thank Let Live and Chad and Amiko and everybody else for having me here. And questions is really what I want. So it's the reality of how they are. So farmers markets are expensive because you have to buy the stalls and you have to have an area to put it. And so that's not really workable, as well as the fact that usually they're like one day for like a few hours. And if people are working in it, it's usually during the day. So it's not really, I mean, one of the things that I hope as well, other than people doing urban gardens, are food carts. And I'd like for, especially in California, it's much easier for us, and I don't know how it is here, but we've got fruit growing on all the trees, and I'm from Texas, and I'm not used to seeing that. It's crazy. But, you know, you got oranges and lemons and everything growing on trees, and if just have a little food cart for people to come and buy. We do have some people who, with their little ice cream trucks, little pushy carts or whatever, that sell strawberries and tamales and things like that. So we're hoping maybe more something like that will resonate more and will be easier for people to get the food.
Depends on the area and what sort of licensing they require for things like that.
We know, yeah, I mean, every area is going to be different, because we know some areas are going to be more interested in the farmers market, where some areas we may have to work with the liquor stores and just say, can we put a produce stand in here? You know, we surveyed a really cool little Indian grocery store that they just had little baskets. Just like 6 baskets is all they had, but they had like almost all of our list of fruits and vegetables just in the little baskets. And it didn't take much. You know, so we know there's little things that they can be doing, but a lot of it takes investment by the cities, and it's going to take investment in the communities. There's been some in Oakland that have started where they did real entrepreneurships with the owners to try and train them how to do more food purchasing. Because there's this theory called at the end of the truck, which basically means that at the lower income communities get the last stuff off the truck, so it always looks worse than the front when they start it all. So there's a lot of that. People know this stuff happens, unfortunately. So, well, and that's, you know, that's in some ways that's a victim to the situation. But there is a strong component of what we're going to hope to do is to teach people how to cook with it. And I don't think it's relegated to any sort of people. I think that a lot of people don't know how to cook. I don't know how to cook. I look at things like eggplant and have no idea how that turns into something that looks completely different. So I think it's just in general, I mean, us as United States, I think most of us don't know how to cook. We don't cook anymore. And so I think that if, you know, it's all communities that are like that. And so I'm sorry to hear that person said that, because a lot of communities, especially Asian communities, eat loads of tofu. I mean, they eat loads of tofu. So, you know, a lot of people go into communities and don't do a lot of outreach first. And so it's kind of like, you know, going into community and say, hey, here's all of this, without doing some working with the people and talking to the people and finding out what they want. I mean, if it wasn't, if they didn't have tomatillos there or nopales there, which are, cactus, it may not have been the types of foods that we eat. So somebody may have been bringing food that we don't, the Chicano culture doesn't eat a whole lot of. It's not our native foods, so to speak, which I don't even eat our native foods, as people in the back row know. I don't eat onions, tomatoes, or cilantro, but that's okay. So, I mean, it's just a matter of, going to these communities first, talking to them, finding out what they want, what they need. And, this is an interesting story, and it's a little bit of a tangent, but I think it kind of maybe raises that. When I went to India last year for my paid job to go to the slums and to talk to the people about the fact that when they were recycling electronic waste without protection, they were getting poisoned by the lead and the cadmium and the mercury and the electronic components. But all those people, we went to a poor area, no running water, no electricity. That is what they wanted to talk to us about. They wanted to talk to us about the fact they had no electricity, no running water. That was their needs. Whereas we were concerned about their environmental health, dealing with hazardous chemicals. And so it was very interesting to us to be like, okay, we need to get this foundation taken care of first before we can come in and talk about some of this other stuff. So some of it's having community meetings, having, one of the things we're going to end up doing, which will be really interesting, is going to the churches. Because we know those are areas that we can reach the people, and we can say, hey, we're willing to do cooking classes. We're willing, tell us what you need. We're going to do cooking classes. We're going to do serving. And then we're going to bring you this food, and we're going to give you recipes. So there's a better working about it versus like putting something on people. Well, really just in talking about fish in general, because I think people a lot of times don't know how to talk to people about fish consumption. And so I work with people who consume animals. And so it's always interesting to try and figure out what works for them to get them to think about it. And so anyway, so I just always like to talk about fish, and just in terms of the suffering of fish, but also the environmental impacts, and just that we have a whole section on our website on it. But just that I think that we need to do more to talk about fish. When I looked at a lot of the other groups' websites and stuff, not a lot of people talk about the ocean life, and they don't talk about, I guess because they're not sanctuary animals. Which, if you look at our website, all the pictures on top are sanctuary animals. We can do that with fish. We're like, who has a sanctuary for fish? But so I think they end up getting the short end a lot, is that we don't talk about it. And same thing with sharks, which Chad and I love sharks. But, we've got to be, sometimes I see Food Empowerment Project as the organization that's going to be talking about a lot of the things that not a lot of people talk about. And so anyway, just the suffering of fish, the fact that they, did y'all know how scallops have eyes? If you Google scallops and eyes, they have the cutest little blue eyes all around them. So anyway, I think everybody knows about fish, but my thing was just to remember to talk about them, that I think a lot of times we forget. There are, none of the names come to mind, but in the newest, when the Farm Bill, or the Food Bill, as Michael Pollan likes to call it, actually Michael Pollan's probably one of the people who's most working on it, they did try and switch a lot of the subsidies to go to actually organic farming. And actually there's a load of grants. There's tons of grants for people who will start organic farms and stuff like that. So that was a lot of that came out of the Farm Bill, was to really start helping entrepreneurs, I guess. And actually a lot on growing in a way that actually protects the environment too. It was very interesting, some of the stuff that came out of it this year. But so there are, but it's still a drop in the bucket, It's still not enough. No, actually, because there's so many groups who work on that issue already. PCRM does, a load of groups do, and so our feeling is more working in the communities, so that, there's kind of a cross that happens, right? You have kids who learn all this stuff and then come home and tell their parents, which is great. We also want to make sure that the families are getting it in general, and because there's always people to work for kids. That just seems to be how it is. And so we kind of wanted to make sure we're actually talking to the communities, even people who don't have children. And PCRM's kind of doing that angle, at least from what we've seen. They've done a whole lot on the school lunch program. And so I think a lot of, I want to say, it's not Food and Water Watch, but somebody else is doing a big push as well. So we're just trying to work more in the community to try and get that going. Because frankly, when the kids come home, if they still only have McDonald's and KFC that are open, because our thing is that a lot of these people work 2 jobs. At least in my neighborhood, the grocery store, the Mercado, closes by 9 o'clock. If somebody works 2 jobs, the only thing that's open when they get home is McDonald's. What if I already did? Well, so in India, they're damming a lot of the areas, which is, like any dam, it creates the trickle effect that there's no water for anybody else down the way. And then that's what they're using to, they own Dasani, but they're also using it for their own products as well. So, I mean, it's just like in Bolivia, where Bechtel tried to privatize the water, where to the point where anybody using any water, I think that if anybody saw the corporation, I think they said how even rainwater, they were trying to charge the people for the rainwater that was falling because it was their water. So anyway, Coca-Cola is doing similar things in India right now. They're probably doing it in other places, but I only know about India. I'm still trying to think of a good solution for that, quite honestly, because our movement is very white. It just is. And again, I see that being, people are always like, oh, we need to get more people of color in the animal rights movement. And I'm like, this isn't like affirmative action here. I mean, we have issues in our own. When I go to meetings for my job and for other social justice issues, it's mostly people of color because we're fighting other fights. We're fighting other causes. We're fighting things that are killing our families. And, we're fighting cancer. We're fighting toxic chemicals. We're fighting everything else. Schools. We're fighting, so, we're out there. We're just fighting in our own communities. We're very community-based for the most part. So in terms of like bringing in to, this cross mix or whatever is, I think that the Let Live Foundation does a good job in terms of like conference costs. It's cheaper. These other conferences that charge exorbitant amount of prices, that's not really trying to reach out to people of lower incomes. It's just not. So something that's cheaper that people can actually afford is going to help. In terms of, I don't know. I try to think of it all the time other than, with serving for our stuff, we were very careful in how, because again, a majority of the people who were willing to help with Food Empowerment Project was like split. So all of us people of color did the poor areas because we fit in more, and I did usually have like a white person with me, which always made them stare at everything even more. But it's difficult. It is difficult. And I guess I'm struggling it with myself to figure out how to do it. I know that we'll be producing some materials in Spanish at some point. And it's funny because it's not like people who are Chicana only speak Spanish. It's like Spanglish. That's pretty much what our materials will be, is like Spanglish, because it's not just all Spanish speaking. But I think that for now, if you have any bright ideas, let me know. But for now, it seems like really helping to dispel this myth that's going on about we don't know how to eat right, we don't know how to do this, that kind of myth that just isn't fair and it's just not true. When these articles come out about obesity and diabetes, to be writing a letter and saying, hey, well, look at access issues. We know 100% in the state of California that's what it is. Senate wrote a report on it. It's access to healthy foods that's our problem. The fact that our neighborhoods don't have a lot of parks, that we don't have a lot of sidewalks for people to go running on. East Palo Alto, which is literally across the highway from Palo Alto, has dirt roads. It's almost impossible to ride your bike there or even walk or run around there. So those issues, there's safety issues in a lot of these communities where people don't want to maybe be outside. So in terms of bringing in, I think that it's awareness is where we're at right now, and then I'm still trying to figure it out. I seriously am. I always struggle to try and figure it out because I do believe in the environmental justice principles where you have to have people, even me though, even when we start going into these communities, I'm only going to be able to speak on behalf of my community. I'm not going to be able to speak on behalf of Southeast San Jose. I don't live there. So we're going to have to find somebody in that community to do the speaking. So it's if I decide to ignore environmental justice principles at some point, then there will be other ways of doing this. But for right now, I'm trying to stick to them and see how we can do it. So I know that's not a good answer, but and as well as the fact is that you don't. As far as I'm concerned, and I really am thankful for people like Patrice Jones, who does this type of outreach as well, is you have to care about the community. You can't, a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to go and I'm going to sell them veganism or something like that. That's why we really try to go through the lactose intolerance, the diabetes, and the obesity angles, as well as the fact that we're talking about all this other stuff that they're going to care about, because it's pretty much, exploited communities that we're talking about. But to go in there, you can tell, you know, even in an animal rights group, if somebody's working on a campaign, you can kind of tell when they're trying to sell everybody else their campaign. It's the same thing. They can see right through it. And, you know, so some of it is just, if you decide to start working in one of these communities and being involved in that community, it's probably better for you just to be a vegan on print. They know you're a vegan and you do whatever work with them, and then more than likely they'll ask you about it and they'll learn about it from you and maybe they'll try it. But I don't know that you're going to get through a lot by going up and proselytizing as much as you would working within that community, seeing how you can help out, seeing how you can be involved. Maybe, you know, they have an urban garden. Maybe you have excess produce one day and you decide to go and donate it to one of the communities and you get to know them that way. You know, but I think that they'll eventually ask questions and learn more than trying to go in and do a talk on it. I mean, maybe it works for some people. I probably wouldn't do it that way, though. But thank you.